What advice do you think would you give to others who want to make an impact for good in terms of using design thinking?
That one's a tricky one. So I think that there's an inherent. Well, it's a really hard one. I think that I've seen a lot of designers try to get themselves into this kind of world and get very quickly overwhelmed with how complex things are. Not only overwhelmed with how many factors to consider, which is usually a ton, but also just how incredibly depressing the statistics typically are. And we had a coworker work with us for about a year, and after a year, he actually decided that he was done with this whole scene. I think he realized that perhaps this isn't meant for me, and that this may be something he does whenever he can on the side, but not as a primary focus of his job. And that actually surprises us a little. I think in our little mini world that we have, we're all optimistic, sort of supremely, infinitely optimistic about our impact. And we were a little taken aback. We didn't realize that anyone would enter this world without realizing how difficult it was, and also would somehow get bogged down by it. So we were reminded about how actually very natural it is to start yourself in this world of social design and then quickly get worn out. So one of the things that we try to remind ourselves is there is a unique take that we can have, that designers can take on this world, and that it's almost like if you can distance yourself a little bit from the enormously complex and depressing and sort of pervasive factors that contribute to making a social problem so embedded, and just treat it like any other project that you typically might do in the design process, it can give you that distance that you might need to treat it like a real systematic approach, as opposed to feeling as though you were giving something of yourself as a volunteer contribution. The sort of the work modes that you operate in have to change a little. So I think if you're thinking as a designer, if you're thinking of using design methods to approach this world, I think it's difficult to not get overwhelmed, but to treat it like have an actual process to go through the project, and treat it like you might treat any other major project you might do in your regular life. But once you kind of get over some of that stuff, some of the particular methods that you might want to employ include a couple of things. One is trying to do a quick analysis, if you can, almost like a landscape of the assets that are in play in that community. So understanding what the assets are allow you to say there are already a number of different things that are happening in our favor that are going underutilized. I think we have found so far in the work we've done, any community that we have, any sort of situation, is not completely 100% devoid of any assets. That I think would be, we've just never seen it. What we often find is that those assets are completely under the radar. They're not being leveraged in perhaps the right way. So our job is to maybe identify what those assets are, and ideally, this is something slightly different version of the same point, is looking for something called a positive deviance. So positive deviance is the idea that there may be someone who's acting in the way that you want them to, despite all of the existing conditions already. So for instance, if you're looking, we have a proposal on right now looking for a grant with the Chicago Department of Public Health. We're looking to try and see if we can reduce the spread of sexually transmitted infection amongst teens, so sexually active adolescents, of which there are countless numbers of. What we're looking for is some teen who has somehow abstained through that period of life, who's sexually active but somehow still stayed free of any of those diseases. Perhaps they've been infected and gotten themselves treated, got infected, didn't spread the disease, and have sort of dealt with, discovered their own condition and then got themselves treated. Somehow, these teens who are acting in the way we want them to. What we want to try and do is try and see if we can study those particular teens and spread that behavior everywhere. So in a sense, we want to scale the positive behaviors that we see, as opposed to write them off as just an outline. So in the design thinking process, that's sort of, or at least adapting design to work in the social sector, we look for these assets and bright spots in a way that I think is different than how we used to use design for solving for business problems in the past.